I'd love to start with inflation, which is really, as we heard, weighing on small business owners right now. What's the NFIB seeing in its own research on that topic?
Certainly. So NFIB has been surveying a sample of our membership for 48 years. And inflation right now is the top concern for about a third of small business owners out there. And if it's not the number one issue that they're facing in operating their business, inflation is substantially or moderately impacting business operations for most of them. So it's a huge concern, and they are still having to navigate this in their day-to-day operations. It's certainly ramped up since the beginning of the year, and most don't see much end in sight or easing of this problem. So they're still facing this huge challenge in front of them in trying to manage those costs.
And in terms of managing those costs, how is that translating into other areas of operating business, like hiring, job openings, labor quality? You know, those have long been the top issues for small business owners. Those are now being outranked by inflation, as you mentioned. How is it kind of touching other areas of operation, and how are owners coping?
Certainly. So their number one tool in dealing with inflation, those higher input costs, is passing along those costs to the customer. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're not able to do that immediately, so it's really hurting cash flow and making managing cash flow really difficult and impacting earnings and all of that. But for a lot of small business owners, you know, there's still a lot of sales support and holding up the employment situation for small firms. So staffing shortages are still a big, huge issue for small firms. Many of them are trying to fill those open positions. And so unfortunately for many, a lot of the frustration is losing sales opportunities because they're not able to fill those positions and meet the demand from their customers.
I definitely want to talk more about the labor situation, but on the inflation front, we're hearing from large companies kind of saying they're testing out the consumer, right? Seeing how much they can raise prices without scaring people away. And a lot of bigger companies, particularly in the retail space and restaurants, which I cover, are talking about pricing power and how they are able to do it. Are small business owners grappling with that question and that equation differently? Is it harder for them to raise prices than it would be for a larger firm to do the same?
Well, certainly their time is of the essence. They are trying to manage a lot of big challenges in operating their business, inflation just being one of them. So many are having to reassess prices more frequently than they've ever had to in the past. And managing that but still remaining competitive is a huge challenge. So that's one of the big concerns, the big stresses for small businesses right now. And so, you know, as they can adjust those prices to absorb input higher costs, they're trying their best. But in the small business sector, it is very competitive.
And what about compensation inflation? Are pressures cooling there at all? Because we've heard for so long, you know, it's an employee's market, right? And people have more bandwidth to kind of ask for more, whether it's pay, benefits, flexibility. What are you seeing on that front?
Well, that's another area that's very competitive. The labor market is certainly a challenge for small business owners. We've seen unprecedented high levels of unfilled job openings. And so they're really having to increase compensation to attract talent, to attract applicants for those open positions, but also to retain their current employment. So there is still a lot of shifting within the labor market, you know, moving to different jobs. And so small business owners are trying their best to keep those employees that they already have and attract applicants for those open positions. So still large numbers are planning to increase compensation going forward and have in the last quarter.
Which brings me to the next question, because all of this is kind of sending, you know, mixed signals on where we're at right now on the recession front. In our own data for this quarter, 57% of owners think we're already in a recession. It's already here. What's the outlook right now from your members on the recession front? We know optimism is kind of fading. Hiring is still a challenge. They're looking for workers. They're feeling wage pressures. What does this all mean? And do your members feel what our survey respondents feel, that we're already there?
Sure, very similar sentiment. Outlook for business conditions in our monthly survey has deteriorated quite a bit from the beginning of the year in face of all of these challenges. But sales and employment are still holding up. So while they might not be in a recession now for many of them or feel like they're in a recession, they're certainly anticipating those headwinds and what might happen. So we've seen a falling off of those expecting higher sales in the next quarter. But the employment front is still really strong in the small business sector. So while they're anticipating and changing business or adjusting business operations, in light of that, with a slowdown in capital spending, things like that, sales and employment are still holding up. So that's the good news. Unfortunately, a lot of these challenges are a real struggle for many small firms.
Certainly, it's such a complex kind of equation here, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But we talked about labor, we talked about inflation, we can't forget about supply chain pressures still hitting Main Street. How are owners grappling? You know, that was such a huge issue during the pandemic. It kind of eased up as other things came to the forefront, but you tell us, you know, that's still impacting a lot of your members as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. So over the last year, we've included that question in our survey, and amazingly, the numbers haven't changed much from last year. Still about 39% are saying that supply chain disruptions are significantly impacting their business, and another 30% are saying that supply chain disruptions are moderately impacting their business. And it's been a similar situation for about the last 10 months or so, and they don't see much relief in the near term. And so they've had to adjust business operations, either, for instance, restaurants limiting the menu, or retailers limiting what they're able to sell. Or if they're able to secure those inventories, a lot of times there are significant delays. So managing customer expectations, things like that, have been a real stress for a lot of small firms in dealing with supply chain disruptions.
We know the recession that we're either in or heading into will be very different from the brief one that we had during the pandemic. Are there any major lessons you feel that owners have learned in the pandemic that can be applied to this new recessionary environment? Any similarities or lessons learned?
Well, I think one area, operating and running a small business can be very isolating and overwhelming, especially in light of a lot of these challenges. So connecting with other business owners and talking through issues that are related to your business, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and learning about best practices and what other business owners have done in adjusting to a lot of these issues that are similar across small businesses. Some are industry specific, but a lot of them are not. And so just connecting with other small business owners to swap ideas and practices, I think, is really helpful and can be very beneficial to small business owners.
Yeah, certainly, Holly, kind of building that network is always so key for owners. Quick last question here. Any areas or sectors of the small business economy that you see are getting hit hardest by, the triple threat of labor, inflation, and supply chain issues right now?
Certainly, restaurants have been really impacted by all three of these issues. They're labor intensive. The supply chain issues are really strong in that area, and then inflation has hit them pretty hard when it comes to food and input costs and energy costs. And then manufacturing, construction, those also have been really impacted by a lot of these headwinds. So unfortunately, there are some industries that have been impacted more than others, and they're still trying to navigate a lot of the challenges that they face.
Certainly a tough environment right now. We look forward to hearing more from your research center. And Holly Wade, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your insights.